you turn somebody chanting the weed, somebody promising jobs for all, while some renting gun to make other people ball, but somebody promising more police car, somebody going to take the country far, somebody putting all the bandits away. He said if they do the crime they're going to damn well pay, but somebody promising a human right, like somebody threatening to put out your light. The more full with little Trinidad boys, a bullet start to whine and put an end to the joy. Now the lion call for the mama to born, the Nike gone, the gold teeth pawn. You see the one the pocket full with blue silk, the one they stop you drinking full cream milk. The little red silk is not their true friend. The blue one have to extra north on the end. So a tag on the toe is now the ticket to hell. But look where we reach. Well, I hear a madman boy as he spread out on the wall. What he said? He said, this is it, I've been here. No time to give up, brother, no time to quit. A chant of a madman in this tale from a strange land. It was the chant of a madman, Lord, give me my only salvation. I say the chant of a madman in this tale from a strange land. Maybe the chant of the madman, Lord, is the only solution. I don't know. Oh, mama, anyway, you got somebody chanting to we. But for we and we go set you free. Somebody promising natural law. Fly like a yogi, end all the war. Seek inner peace, end all the pain. The same woman promising to go down again. Somebody promising to run all the bread. Somebody pushing a world-class head. Somebody clean out the weed well fast. Somebody cleaning out the weed well fast. But somebody letting the cocaine pass. 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 Somebody promised to abolish the tax. Somebody promising to kiwi the fat. Somebody promising to clean up this land. But in this clean land, rat killing man, we bright little youths going to waste. Somebody binge the smile on their face. Somebody take one love off the shelf. Then the one love boys start to sell out themselves. Somebody going to end all this talk about race, but they can't tell me that with a straight face. Big people dying, the crime can't solve. A madman around is my only resolve. I hear the madman ball as he lie here on the wall. What you say? This is it, I've been here. No time to give up, brother, no time to quit. A chant of a madman in this tale from a strange land. It was the chant of a madman, Lord, the only salvation. I said the chant of a madman in this tale from a strange land. Maybe the chant of a madman, Lord, the only solution. I don't know. Oh mama, oh mama,
chant of the madman is the only solution. David Michael Rudder, royalty, as we say in the Calypso world. King David Michael Rudder, the madman's rant. Somebody making the cocaine pass. Somebody telling me they're going to end all this race, but they can't tell me that with a straight face. Welcome to Politics 101, Thursday evening. You know, it's Black History Month. We haven't had a chance to do a lot of Black History programming because, you know, the teacher strike has been taking up a lot of our time. But tonight we are going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to be continuing that conversation we started a few weeks ago. And that is race and economic justice. Race and economic justice. The question of economic justice is very much on the front burner. That's what the teachers are out there for. They're talking about economic justice. Economic justice, that's what the strike represents. And they are now into the third week of the strike, coming to the end of the third week of the strike. Initially, the strike should have been for 2 weeks, and they have extended it. The government has not budged. The government has not budged, and the teachers are still out there. So it's an impasse. It's an impasse, and we're going to see where it goes. But the question of economic justice from a racial standpoint is very much alive. We talk about economic justice from a class standpoint, that the poor, regardless of race and ethnicity, want justice, economic justice, equal and equitable distribution of our resources. But there's also economic justice from a racial and ethnic standpoint, as the various ethnic groups in the society make demands on government, for their share of the Commonwealth. We have Eric Phillips here tonight. We're expecting Tacuma Ogunseye. We're expecting Vincent Alexander. Eric Phillips is backstage and ready to roll. So welcome to all of you. Welcome to all of you. If you're joining us from inside Guyana, welcome. Welcome to Politics 101. The teachers, of course, have gone to court, and the matter should have been called today. The Attorney General's office has asked for time to prepare. At least that's what the report said yesterday. And I have not been able to get a definitive report on what transpired in court today. But clearly, the court is going to grant some time for them to get their act together. You wonder sometimes. Anyhow, welcome to Politics 101. If you're joining us from outside of Guyana, a very good evening to you. If you join us from in the United States of America, from Canada, from anywhere in the wider Caribbean, welcome to Politics 101. Please share the link. Welcome to Politics 101. It's a Thursday night. It's been quite a hectic week. We had Nigel Hughes was here last night, and we had quite a wide ranging interview. And so many of you turned out last night. We had Henry Jeffrey and Amanza Walton Desir earlier in the week. The whole question of constitutional reform, and we had two approaches. Amanza argued that changing the constitution is perhaps not the premium. The premium is changing the minds of the politicians. That if you have good politicians, then even the present constitution will work. Henry Jeffrey took a different view, and he argues that we have to have constitution, we have to have rules. And Nigel last night said it quite eloquently, that constitutions and rules are there not for the best of us, but it's really for the worst of us. You know, philosophically, many of us contribute to the view that human beings are inherently good. are inherently good. Um, uh, but as Hobbes argue, mankind in his natural state, his life would be short, nasty, and brutish. That if we leave human beings with unlimited power, unchecked power, it brings out the worst in them. And so therefore we have to have rules and constitutions that are able to contain the excesses of human beings. Good evening and welcome. Good evening, Donna Fresno. Welcome to Donna Frenso, sorry. My eyes are playing a little trick with me. Glenford Gordon, welcome to all of you. The question of economic justice, race and economic justice, is very much on the agenda. African Guyanese and their struggle for ethnic equality and ethnic equitability, especially as it has to do with the resources that have come on our way. Welcome to Politics 101, and we're going to get going. Eric Phillips is here. Let's bring in Eric. Good evening.
Good evening, David. How are you?
I am doing fine, and it's good to see you again.
Yes, we were both traveling and doing surgery.
Yes.
David, before you go any further, I'd like to make a comment because I'm simply outraged that any African Guyanese would say that the Constitution is good. This is an egregious Constitution. It is an anti-human rights Constitution, especially in an ethnic enclave, winner take all. We were in winner take all during slavery. The master was in control. And you said it correctly. Human beings behave at their worst. And unless a necessary prerequisite for African equity and African economic growth is constitutional reform, not electoral form. So I'm outraged that after all these letters you have written, I have written, all the committees we've had over the last 10 years, that somebody still thinks this is a good constitution. It is an egregious constitution that's anti-human rights and anti-African.
And very good, Eric, and I'm glad you have weighed in on the issue because the Constitutional Reform Commission has been assembled and we have the various nominees to that Reform Commission. Are you hopeful?
There's too many politicians in it. They need people with common sense. The politicians will always think in their own best interest and not in Guyana's interest. The PVP will want to maintain some winner-take-all architecture because of their ethnic majority, and the PNC will try to do something too. We need a new constitution like South Africa. South Africa had a winner-take-all constitution called apartheid. And what happened? They had to redo the whole constitution. They brought in lawyers from New York and created a new constitution to make it more equitable. And even then, Black South Africans are 50% unemployed. They own little equity because of historical injustices. And instead of Mandela doing special purpose vehicles to buy into the 6 companies that own 97% of all the companies in Guyana, he should have seized shares. Because I was part of the process where we did special purpose vehicles to buy shares in white African firms to pay back with dividends. And because of economic fluctuations, all those SPVs are lost. But you had people like Cyril and Moss Machine and others who became billionaires. But the rest of the people suffered. Why don't we learn from history? This constitution is horrendous. It's a slave constitution we inherited from the Westminster. This is not for a heterogeneous society. This is for a homogeneous society. I'm outraged.
Yes. Eric, on the same point, from an African Guyanese standpoint, why is constitutional reform important, and what from an African Guyanese standpoint would be the major things that they would look for in constitutional reform?
First of all, we want to get rid of winner take all. Secondly, we want to have constituencies. We don't want to have a list. We want people who are accountable to the constituencies in which they vote. And we need a two-thirds majority in some issues so that whoever is in power cannot make decisions that will affect us without us having input. It's very fundamental. Winner take all is not for it's heterogeneous society. And given the fact that in 1838, there were 84,000 Africans here, and between 1838 and 1917, 239,000 Indians were brought here. 75,000 went back. That ethnic difference will always be there in perpetuity. So if we want to remain caught and lose every election, I don't think if they believe they're going to win an election on the winner take all, because all the forces are against them. We're still back at 1823. In 1823, the government was against us, the Crown was against us, the Amerindians were against us, the British were against us. We're still back at 1823 now, because when you look at all the forces aligned against Black people, the Portuguese, the Chinese, the Amerindians, the Indians are all aligned because they're the business community. If you look at the budget, you'll see that alignment is strengthened. So we will never win a winner-take-all election, and it's not good for Guyana. Either the Ecpnm winning it or the PPP winning it. It's not good for Guyana. It's outrageous that politicians in this age still talking this bullshit.
Yes, Eric Phillips here, weighing in on constitutional reform and what needs to be done from an African Guyanese standpoint. Eric, tonight we want to talk about the whole question of economic justice and what needs to be done from an African Guyanese standpoint. We have diagnosed the problem. We know that the economy is skewed against African Guyanese interests. A lot of this is historical, but a lot of it has been deliberate in recent times, given the winner-take-all system. And that African Guyanese have to not just call for equitable distribution of resources, but also put forward on the table proposals. And you've been thinking about some of these issues. Talk to us about what you think.
Thanks, David. You're absolutely correct. We cannot wait as an African Guyanese community for politicians to put forward a development plan for us, because they all argue that they're a multiracial party. And so everything they do must be in that context. They have lost the historical context of the 15 things that were done to us by previous governments, Dutch, British, and post-independence governments, that have made us where we are today. And if a politician does not understand that and factor that into an inclusive economy, we will always be left out. We saw it with the last government. They didn't have money, so that was an issue. But they could have done many different things to promote the inclusion of Africans in the economy. We don't have a private sector. And because we don't have a private sector, regardless of how large the budget is, we will never participate. So a fundamental issue, after we do a political, economic, social, cultural, legal environment, after we do a SWOT analysis, after we do Porter's 5 forces to look at competition, a fundamental issue, a key priority, is a private sector, building an African private sector. And that could only happen if there's what I call constitutional reform. Constitutional reform is one of the key priorities for us to have an inclusive economy. Next key priority is reparations. The indigenous people in Guyana own about 19% of Guyana. And that's because our politicians don't know the history. There are 3 indigenous groups, the Waiwais, the Makuchis, and the Wapishanas, who came to Guyana 100 to 200 years after Africans were brought here. But yet, those groups are included in the Amerindian Act of 2006 that gave Amerindians 13.8% of Guyana and now 18%. Now, if our politicians had known our history, they would have realized that the Amerindians not only came here after us, but they were in partnership with the Dutch and British to defeat us. 1763 was lost, which is what we're celebrating now with coffee. because the Amerindians worked with the Dutch to hunt us down, hunt coffee them down, and also blocked off coffee and his troop from going to Essequibo. Same thing happened in 1823. They've always had alliances with the Dutch and the British, but yet they were given reparations and we weren't. So it's a historical mistake that at independence, our leaders did not understand the historical context of where we are and would have brought in reparations for African Guyanese. So another priority is reparations, land, and African Development Fund, and that could only happen through legislation. The third priority for us to develop a viable economy in which generational wealth will be in the African community is we have to create, as I said, a viable, vibrant private sector. We have to create an internal Black economy where we buy from ourselves. We need to develop strong SMEs. We need to go back to corporate economics because we cannot compete in the public sector or in the private sector. The third sector of economic growth is cooperative economics, which is part of the Kwanzaa, right? And that's part of how we bought our villages. We also need a commercial banking license. And then we need sustainable brands. One of the things that's happening that's good is that an airline would soon be flying from Ghana to Nigeria to Barbados to Jamaica to Guyana back to Ghana. That allows us to trade with Africa, to trade with ourselves. That allows us to bring in brands because all the brands have been taken up by different ethnic groups in Guyana. We need to bring in brands like Aspen Pharmaceuticals. We need to bring in brands like Nando's. We need to create our own brands in Guyana where we can buy from ourselves and trade with Africa. And now that that airline is being put in place, it might be announced next week. It gives us an opportunity to do trading with our folks. We also need to create a purpose-driven group of skilled and educated African Guyanese. We know where this economy is going. We need to be targeting 2,000 engineers, 1,000 accountants, 500 scientists, so many environmentalists. We need to be doing that. Nobody's going to do that for us. We have to consciously do that. AGDA has a school where they do the particular curriculum, but they also are vested in being African conscious. We need our own pharmacies. We need our own bakeries. We need our own supermarkets. That's not difficult to do if we have capital, right? We also have to restore crops and have them better managed. Because Buxton, for example, how many acres is there? 500, 600? We're growing a lot of cash crops. There are no economies of scale. Buxton could be a coconut plantation, but it has to share something with the African villages next to it, so you could use solar power and get economies of scale. We need to look at what the 25 by 5 CARICOM plan is. What are the crops they want? Import substitution. How do we target those? It's happening in Region 5 and in Region 6 right in front of our faces. Even today, there is an announcement that there's going to be a 10 million US cassava farm that's going to be done by a French group, brought in by an Afro-Guyanese person who isn't going to have any equity. Well, why weren't we thinking of that? But more importantly, we forget that June last year, this government spent $40 million to create an agro-processing plant for cassava in Oriella for the Amerindians. So things are happening. Do we know there are 193 community development plans for Amerindian villages? Where are our plans? We have villages too. We're subject to climate change. That's a big risk. What is our strategy for dealing with our villages in 2030? We need more land. We need reparations. We also need to fight this issue of local content. In 2016, I wrote an article that said we do not need local content. We need national content. And people didn't understand what I was saying. Local content has global connotations. So right now, a farm in Trinidad or Jamaica has the same rights as Guyanese farms. National content means that national farms get the right. And only national farms can own land, which can be leveraged into economic wealth, which can be leveraged as equity into deals. So the government is, the Indian community, the Portuguese community is complaining about local content. But we are also local. We're not even included in the local content discussion. And of course, groups that come in from the Caribbean are told if they do joint ventures with African firms, they will not get any contracts. So all of those are issues. We also need a national service program for our young people. A lot of them are uneducated. And when you get into this oil economy, they're going to be displaced permanently. And that um, national service should include UG. It should include all of our technical institutes. There should be channeling. And so it's not about going in the bush only, which is what people think about national service. It's about training, it's about skills, it's about exposure, it's about apprenticeship, so that we can target the sectors that are critical in the economy. And then, of course, we need to do village mapping so that we understand what's in our villages so we can do village diversification. If we have those things, reparations, a banking license, an integrated architecture for agriculture, an African Development Fund, we create youth entrepreneurship. We have to train our own people. We have to buy from ourselves, create loyalty programs, create loyalty brands from Africa because everything else is gone. And we need to do strategic partnerships with the diaspora in the USA, in Africa, in Europe, because they have the money. And then we need to target agriculture, oil and gas, construction, ICT. We need to deal with village diversification. We need to look at trade within CARICOM, trade outside of CARICOM, and we need to look at our education. So when you put all those things together, we have a chance because we have to realize that we don't have any capital accumulation. If you look at how capital accumulation was developed in Guyana, gold and diamond smuggling, money laundering, drugs, corruption, smuggling cross-border, affirmative procurement for other groups. That's how other groups created wealth. We were never the people smuggling. We were never the people money laundering. We were never the people smuggling gold and diamond and guns and people. That's how wealth was created in the private sector. And that wealth has now been leveraged in the oil economy because it can be. So all the things that are being bought for cash, money laundering, gold smuggling, diamond smuggling. So we did not have illegal capital accumulation. So we can't go to the bank and leverage assets because we didn't have those illegal activities to create assets. So we have no generational wealth. We have no banks. We have no African Development Fund. But the Amerindians have all of those because they're perceived as a group that needs protection. When we're the groups that they used to hunt down, we're the groups that have never had a formative procurement. Right now, Amerindians are getting 24 million each group, 204 groups for climate change. Now, climate change is about low carbon development strategy. If you look at 2030 and where all villages are, we need climate change money because the LCDS is about low carbon growth, but it's also about resilience and mitigation of climate change. So everything is here, but we need constitutional reform as fundamental because politicians will behave in their own interest and to remain in power. And a winner take all means that we will never be in power. I don't care what APNU or anyone thinks, because the forces are lining up against you more and more now that you have oil. The Indians are here, the Chinese are here, the Qataris are here. Everybody is here. They're not going to partner with us because we're going to look at some deals and say we don't want to be corrupt. Those groups don't care. So if the APNU believes they're going to win an election based on winner take all, they're smoking hashish or something. I think you might be mute, David.
Eric Phillips here laying out a grand plan, if you will, a laundry list of things that need to be done to bring African Guyanese up to scratch and to make us competitive in this dynamic economy that is taking off because of the windfall from oil. Vincent, Ecpnm, I know because I had you guys on here and we did several programs on what you found to be the priorities as far as African Guyanese are concerned, what they see as the economic priorities. So if you will chime in Bear in mind what Erica said and bearing in mind what Ecpnm has found, you can give us a sense as to what an initiative part of African Guyanese for more economic justice in Guyana could look like.
Good night, David, and good night to your viewers. Sorry for being a bit late, but I've been able to hear much of what Erica said. I think we have to understand where we're coming from, where we're at, and in fact where we want to go. The state of African Guyanese is as a consequence of historical circumstances, including the circumstances at independence and the world community and how it treats the people of African descent. What the Amerindians have been able to get has a lot to do with preconditions for independence.
Yep.
Undoubtedly, the colonizers and international forces came to a position in relation to people, indigenous people, of certain conditions on us as a prerequisite. That's what the Amerindians are essentially benefiting from. The problem, therefore, has been a non-acceptance of the peculiar state of the people of African descent. I would argue, if one looks carefully at what the United Nations has said, we can see that there's now a acceptance, at least at the level of the United Nations, of the way in which the people of African descent have been assembled. But we can't attribute that merely to the United Nations. You have to bear in mind is that the people of African descent themselves, from the Durban Conference coming forward, who articulated their position and were able to get the UN to buy in to their position.
Mm-hmm.
The UN buy-in is good, but it's insufficient because though the UN has declared a decade, they declared it in an environment that is no different internationally, and in the case of Guyana, locally, from the environment which predated the declaration.
Vincent, are you done?
So that in
Yes.
Guyana,
Go ahead.
we have a situation where the government
We seem to be having some bandwidth issues there
Yeah.
was hot
with Vincent. Yes.
on the economic and political landscape of the country. So internally, whilst we have signed on to the decade, we have maintained this position is no different from that pre-decade in relation to where the people of African descent are located on the political and the economic landscape. Internally, there's also the need for acceptance of where we are located internally. I don't know that all of us, even all the people of African descent, have accepted where we're located. And if they have accepted where we're located, they haven't necessarily seen the need for collective action and have fallen into the ethos of the world where they are looking to take individual action to reprieve themselves from the situation. So we have a problem in terms of collective action. And in fact, in terms of what kind of action is required. The kind of action required is not short.
Yeah,
They
still bad.
may be short on it, but there are short-term things that may seek to alleviate and mitigate in terms of individual problems. But at the end of the day, it is the long-term things that have to be done. And the UN quite clearly defined that those long-term things have to be based on institutional reformation or restructuring and legal restructuring. And so we ourselves have got to have a clear understanding about that. But if we don't have a clear understanding about that, then we're likely to end up not at one, as I think has turned out to be the case to some extent. Some people, in terms of how they've seen Ecpnm. Because Ecpnm came into conflict with the government essentially at the time when we had prepared for advocacy that was going to be touching on fundamental institutional and legal frameworks that are necessary to make a difference for the people of African descent. So on one hand, we have to accept the problem. On the other hand, we have to accept what is the approach to the problem, and that this cannot be negotiated individually. It has to be negotiated at the level of the collective. Now that's problematic, and I always point to South Africa to show how problematic that is. That in all of this, and not peculiarly people of African descent, you have class differentiations and class differences. And unless we can, across class, identify the common issues that affect us as people of African descent, then you may well find that there are class forces lined up that are prepared to cooperate at the level of class.
Yeah, Vincent is right.
Vincent,
Yeah.
Vincent, you're going in and out. You're going in, we seem to be having some problems there.
David, can I comment on what Vincent said?
Yes,
Because
yes, I
what
would
he's
like
saying
you to
is
comment
true.
on the issue of
The
the individual versus the collective.
Yeah, it all comes down to leadership. We've had poor leadership. The fundamental purpose of a leader is to define the state of affairs of your constituency, economic, political, cultural, that. The black leadership in this country have not seen themselves as a black community, and as such have never advocated for black rights. It's always for community rights, national rights. And that's because they do not understand the historical context that evolved, as well as the class structures that are now leaping on it. Because the black professional class does not have the same interests as the broader black class, black people. And so you see right now an alignment of many of those professionals acting as individuals, benefiting, but against the broader interests of people of African descent. And Vincent is correct in that the UN understood this. And we must also remember that the indigenous people had 2 decades back to back. Because the first decade, there wasn't enough done, there wasn't enough attention done to it. So they had a second decade. And it's during that second decade we even had the Amendment Act of 2006. These things are connected because of external pressure. And now we're pushing for a second decade now that we're more conscious of what is needed. The UN funded a decade with no financing. That means it was created to fail. You cannot fund something to deal with the Durban and the DDPA and all the global issues facing Black people and ask governments who are in
Eric,
themselves
you're making an important point.
to implement. Yeah. Go ahead.
And that point points to the need for us to ensure the first day, second day, lessons learned coming out of the national community in
The
terms of
first decade.
its policies on funding, addressing the question of the state of the people of African descent. But having said that, I would like to, in some regards, go back and to contend that I would not point a finger in totality at the leadership of Burnham. I think Burnham understood the problem, and I think Burnham was caught up in an environment where to clearly advocate for the people of African descent was not what the international community or the local community would have been sympathetic towards. But he, in his effort to look at the problem of the people of African descent, not to the detriment of others, did things that provided some equitable mechanisms. But I don't think that our own consciousness lent utilization of the mechanisms that Burnham had put in place, be it National Service for Re-Education, be it Mortgage and Finance Bank, be it the Agricultural Bank. Those were all institutions that were not intended to discriminate against anyone, but to address issues affecting people of African descent. The deficit in that was that there was no clear articulation of where the people of African descent were located, and therefore how they should use these institutions, equitable mechanisms to redress their state. And so we need to learn those lessons, hopefully into the second decade. And in that regard, we need to see from a economic and a class perspective the importance of cooperatives in various forms, not that form we think where cooperative has to be a productive entity where the people themselves are working, but in various forms, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in land acquisition, whether it's in acquisition
It could
of
be equity
resources,
companies.
we
Yep.
have to see cooperative. It's so important
Yep. Totally agree.
because
Yeah.
the
We have
class factor
Mhm.
in our group is people of African descent. And within the country at large,
we have
it's still
Tacuma Ogunseye, who was joining us.
its
Tacuma, there
position
is some
in the
background
class.
chatter. There's some background chatter there where you are. You probably want to, I don't know if a television is on or something there.
Fun.
You know,
Mhm.
go ahead, Vincent.
So I'm saying we've got to get this, we ourselves, and this got to get the state to understand that this struggle is not merely an ethnic struggle. But this struggle also has the element of class. Because unless we deal with the element of class, we'll not be able to deliver to the ordinary people. We have got African Guyanese who believe that you have just not so. Mechanisms have to be put in place for the ordinary people to be able to benefit from the largesse that the state now has at its disposal. So there's a lot of work to be done among ourselves, and for us doing that work among ourselves to bring pressure to bear on our politicians. People of African descent have a view that they express in relation to our politicians, but I'm not quite sure that that view really reflects the way in which we ought to address the question of resolving the dilemma of the people of African descent. So there's a lot to be done among ourselves to make us conscious and a force, the way in which Durban became a force, then internally we too have to become a united force to forge the way forward. Because indeed our politicians are playing to an arena that is not the African arena necessarily. They play into a national arena and therefore downplaying, because of the environment, the issue of the people of African descent, when in fact we have to be bold in this society to indicate that there are ethnic problems and to seek to articulate and openly address ethnic problems, bearing in mind that that will mean you have to address problems facing people of African descent, Indian descent, Amerindian descent, but these people are not affected in the same way and in the same magnitude, and therefore you may have a situation where at a particular point in time, one set of people seem to be the greater beneficiaries, but basically it is equity for the purpose of equalization. So there's internal work to be done among ourselves, as much as there's work to be done in terms of pushing the political party in the state in a particular direction. And I must say that in the context of the Caribbean, there is even work to be done across the Caribbean, because regimes are maintained by internal forces and external forces. And I don't know that the external forces, which are Afro, if not Afrocentric, African, but if not Afrocentric, that are not encouraging and facilitating the internal regimes that are suppressing the people of African descent. Martley, I had reason to say that here is Martley internationally saying the best things and cannot, with that brilliant mind of hers, I am now
Vincent is not that she doesn't know. Vincent is not that she doesn't know. She's playing to a geopolitical audience.
The situation,
yeah. Vincent, let's get Ogunseye in here. Ogun,
using
I don't
the
know
same tools
how
of
much
analysis
of the conversation
that she uses.
Yeah. Vincent, we seem to,
the international
when you
situation.
lean forward, Vincent, we are hearing you better. When you lean back, we are losing you. So you want to come forward, because when you come forward, we are hearing you. When you lean back, you're getting dropped. Right. Ogunseye, I don't know how much of the conversation you've heard, but you're free to come in on any of the points. Yeah. When you lean forward, we hear you better. Once you lean back, we tend to lose you, Vincent. Go ahead, Ogun.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I heard most of it. I was following on my
I think
phone.
there's a system failure taking place tonight.
Yes. I was following on the phone while I tried to sort out the technical problems I had with the computer. But anyway, I'm here. In fact, I was in very early. Okay, I think that both Eric and Vincent touch on various aspects of the problem. But I think the issue that confront us, because, these could be never-ending discussions when you do, and in the context of you not having political power to implement the decisions, it could be just never-ending decisions. And I think that Africans have to prioritize our political and economic engagement. The economic emancipation of Africa and the reorganization of the economy and the building of African economy is a more long-term project. Okay? But we have to recognize that an important or the most important ingredients at the moment is African people have to get back into political power. And they have to get back in political power, not in an absolute sense. Okay? The winner-take-all political system is what, in the main, have shaped the politics of the country. And until we change the winner-take-all system, then a lot of the issues that we want people to, and the country to address, like race and ethnicity, would not be properly addressed as we have seen in the last 60 or 65 years on the winner-take-all system. But if we have a power-sharing system for a moment, which take away or reduce the political ethnic confrontation to one that is more manageable, okay, you open up the possibilities for more objective discussions of these things, and politicians don't have to do the dancing that they have been doing for the last 60 or 65 years. So for me, I think that our priority has to be to win political power, okay, and not in the old way. I'm not interested in Africans having political power as Africans or an African party, because we got to police the whole country. We got to keep the others out. And we don't have time for that. The African economic and social condition is one that requires emergency, and time is not on our side. And we have some hard decisions to make as a community. And it could only be best be made when you have some significant portion of the political power that allows the possibility of implementation. I will argue that Africans have to withdraw a significant number of their people from the police, the army, and the public sector, and put them into private sector and economic activity. Because we know with technology, the security numbers, then we take guards and people who watch things. Security, as technology develops, they need less and less human people, and therefore the value they're going to be dropping. We have seen historically what happened. We invest a lot in defense of the country and creating the security for the economic development of all the ethnic groups, and they turn back, and people don't have a lot of appreciation for that. You know, and I think that we have to make a strategic pivot to deliberately, systematically, we can't do it overnight, begin to encourage Africans to remove out of those areas that doesn't have any significant numeration. What's our teachers fighting for pittance? You know, so for me, political power at the moment is the most important question to create the possibility of implementing the ideas that have been articulated by both Vincent and Eric. You know, and my conviction, I mean, I'm in the wrong. I don't want to get to the Burnham thing, because sometimes we should got special things to discuss Burnham on the past. But I, as an Assyrian, know that Burnham was helped by Assyria, and what a lot of things that people may think that Burnham don't understand, or they want to do, and all kinds of things. It's more complicated than that, you know. But I don't want us to spend time with Burnham, because we have to deal with the current challenges that we have here. And the most important challenge is to renovate the political system to one of executive power sharing. I don't really care whether it's a perfect, no constitutional system or governance can be perfect. But we want something that suspends the intensity of the political tug of war, so that we could pivot African interests, okay, to more ethnic interests, in order to save our people. And in so doing, we'll be saving Guyana.
Eric and Vincent, Ogunseye has thrown out some bold suggestions there. He's talking about, well, he agrees with all of us that the winner-take-all system is not good for African people. It's not good for all ethnic groups. But since we're talking about Africans, it's not good. It's not good for us. It has not been good for us. It is not that whenever African parties have been in power, some things have not been steered to the community. But there's a limit to which those parties have been able to steer the kind of resources to the
David, I don't know the level of interruption really is providing. We really affected all of us, collectively and individually from time to time, with the quality of the internet tonight. I don't know if the
we're getting Ogunseye fine. We're getting Eric fine. It seems to be affecting you the most, Vincent.
It might be a localized area thing for you, Vincent, because we're hearing everybody.
We're hearing everybody else fine except you. But hold with us. Eric,
yes, I agree with Ogunseye in many areas. First of all, the winner-take-all is anti-Black, anti-African, anti-human rights, anti-Guyana. But given the amount of wealth that is now accumulating in Guyana, changing that will not be done internally. It has to have international intervention.
Right.
And whenever you have oil, there's always international intervention, including the last election.
Right.
What
Eric, I want to especially get you and Vincent to key in on that thing that Africans should withdraw partly from the public sector, the army, the police,
but that's my point. We have to build a Black economy.
Yes.
And I laid out several of the things we need to do. We need to buy from our friends, buy from ourselves. We need a private sector. We need to strengthen SMEs. We need funds to do that. We need reparatory justice. And we need a mindset change also. We need to be trading with other people like us in the Caribbean. With the airlines going to Africa, we need to find new brands, new things, because all of that. But we need to train our people, retrain them, so that we become more entrepreneurial, so that when the opportunities do arise, they can participate. Right now, there are a lot of dropouts. Right now, the school system is failing us, especially our people who can't go to private schools. So we also have to target where the economy is going, where we want to participate effectively, where we can, because technology is changing rapidly. And so I agree with him, but withdrawal means to me creating new opportunities in the private sector. And we have to do that because no one else will.
Vincent? Vincent, you want to lean forward as much as you can. Yes.
Like I don't think the problem is leaning forward. There seems to be a real problem with the internet. I don't know. It's affecting others. But certainly.
Can he dial in by phone and we still see him there? And perhaps the song may be better through the phone? Is that possible?
Yeah, try to see if you can come in via your phone, Vincent, and let's see.
I'll probably let me come out.
Yeah. Ogunseye, I want you to deal with the question of the individualism that that is very much part of the African Guyanese instinct, as opposed to collective action. How do you propose that we deal with that question? Because that's a question that has to be dealt with here and now. How do we challenge the kind of individualism where African Guyanese feel that as individuals, they can make deals with the government, they can make deals with Mohammed, they can make deals with this body and that body, and in a sense, ignore the collective plight. How do you address that issue?
No, I don't think that is not an easy issue to address when you don't have political power. Mm-hmm. I mean, even in places where the intensity of the conflict, even in Palestine, there are collaborators between Palestinians and Israelis, even in a vicious situation like that where people, are sanctions, So, but the fundamental thing for Africans, we got to recognize that we have a deficit, a historic deficit. Africans culturally didn't come out of slavery and colonialism with the cultural cloak, to prosecute collective actions. We are people who have been shaped by collective behavior. We're not individualistic people. To the extent we are behave individualistic, movement. So we start with that ideological deficiency. Now, in terms of our people present behavior, I will maintain you can't argue people into correct behavior and have a sufficient amount of people responding to the logic or the sense of your argument, that we should not promote the individual but promote the collective. That has always been a hard sell. I remember we have used to engage with that in our career when I was 16, 17. We engage in those things. And I'm convinced that to significantly, you have to remove the political problem. There should be Africans should not find themselves in an economic, social, and political situation where they have to look to the PPP, or others, for economic survival. That is the crux of the matter.
But Ogunseye, it's a little more fundamental than that.
If
Ogunseye, it's a little more fundamental than that.
Yes, go ahead, Eric.
It's a little more fundamental than that. We've been trained by the church and the school system to be what we are. Wealth is not something great in the church. Turn the other cheek. We've been trained in a capitalist system that is aligned with Christianity, which is against even our nature in terms of community development, the village movement, how tribes operated. So apart from Ogunseye was saying, and he's right, the political power is critical, we have been brainwashed into believing that individualism is it. If you read George Danz's report, we don't even share generational wealth with our children. That's learned behavior. It's not, we have to redo that through understanding our history and our culture and our value system. Because we cannot compete in a capitalist system starting last. That's not how that system works. Because those who have money get more money. And if you're going to start at the bottom of the ladder in that system, you can't survive. So you have to change your model and do cooperative economics, where you look at your community as the market and target that and accumulate capital to invest in each other, which is how our culture is historically. So it's political, I agree, but it's also how we've been trained and taught and educated by the church in particular, as George Danz stated.
Let me throw this out to you all, because clearly the political parties or the major political party that draws most of its political support from Africans have not engaged frontally the Black issue, not at the level of policy, not at the level of ideology, clearly. And that is not, in my estimation, going to change tomorrow. We have a number of African organizations. The Padaji claims an affiliation of over 50 or over 60 organizations. With that number of African organizations, how come we still have a deficit when it comes to the changing of attitudes as far as Africans are concerned? And I would like you all to weigh in on that.
Look, I know Vincent will talk more about this. I just want to say something.
Yeah.
When you're starving, when your public service salaries and an economy that's escalating in inflation, you're fighting for your life. Mm-hmm. So that consciousness of acting collectively gets dissipated. And that's exactly why the teachers aren't going to be paid the way they should be paid, because that is preventing us from accumulating capital to buy things, to invest in each other. So this teacher strike and this public service suppression of salaries is not incidental. It's strategic. Because when you look at how capital is accumulating, and I mentioned the ways the other groups accumulated capital, gold and diamond smuggling, money laundering, drugs, corruption, affirmative procurement, cross-border smuggling, land theft. When you look at how that's been accumulated, we're not going to go there to accumulate wealth. So our wealth is through salaries. And if that salary is depressed, then it changes the dynamics of how we behave with each other. That's all I wanted to say.
Vincent, all these African groups, yet we have a deficit of consciousness and collective action.
David, to a very large extent, the problem which confronts us in terms of how the people of African descent are treated is a political problem. We have a number of African organizations, but they are far from necessarily being political.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these organizations were formed at the local level to do things within the framework of the present system, cultural things, some economic things, others social things, so that we're not at Eden in terms of a political agenda. They may all as individuals recognize the problems that the people of African descent are faced with, but they're not organizations which were formed to confront in a collective way those problems. They were formed to deal with the local and parochial issues in their communities. And therefore, work has got to be done among those organizations. And as you do work among those organizations, you obviously come up against a state which will then seek to say, more a government than a state, that will then seek to say that you are political. They will then try to tie you to a political party and to do everything to ensure that you can't work as a collective. So, for example, the way in which the government took away Padre subvention and then offered this subvention to these groups to give them monies to do things that are unrelated to the decade in a sense. They're not addressing the fundamental problems of the decade. They're addressing the normal local activity. Let's have some classes, let's have a cultural group, and things like that. So that we have got among ourselves to do a lot more work in terms of our consciousness so that that can lend to us working collectively, whilst not necessarily being political in the sense that we join a party and align to a party, but being political in the sense that we understand that we have to be able to influence the way in which authority and power is exercised to affect our well-being. And that's one of the challenges we are faced with. The present government is well aware of that situation and are being preemptive to some extent in terms of that coming together of the people of African descent for purpose.
Ogunseye, as you address that question, is the old Ascria model of a political cultural organization. Is that model perhaps still relevant today?
Okay, I want to go right there because there's where we're going anyhow. I think it's very relevant. I think that, okay, we have, as Vincent and Eric pointed out, African organizations, okay, we have a number of them, but they weren't developed to deal with the critical issues that face African people. I will say historically, based upon my own knowledge and my own participation, Ascria has gone the furthest, both culturally and politically, to understand that African culture is not only singing and dancing, but I've seen culture in the most profound form, which includes its political positions.
And economic.
And economic and all of that, holistic. Now, I think that the next group that I know probably might have gone in terms of discussion and debate about African condition that I know is is AGDA. But even AGDA, there's some issues. But I think AGDA has reached a point where it addressed those things frontally. And I think I will want to see the Pan-African Association on PANAF. Okay, maybe the third. Outside those three, I really don't have a sense that a lot of the rest have evolved, okay, politically, socially, and culturally, to understand that their mission is not limited to the community or limited to singing and dancing and promoting African wear, but a holistic approach to culture. So even though we have a lot of them in numbers, it is few that really deal with the fundamentals. I think unless we have groups that deal with the fundamentals, then we will find ourselves in a very problem that we're there. I don't like to discuss Burnham in this present context, but just to point out that Askria and the Burnham and the PNC had an old problem. When we were arguing that African culture is both political, economic, social, holistic, and so Burnham and the PNC want us to restrict to singing and dancing and don't get into the political fray. And they have done quite a lot to shape, I will say, the conditioning of African groups, that politics is with the party. Culture, as defined in the narrow sense, is for you, singing and dancing and them things. And I think we suffering the consequences of that. Okay? So I think that is part of the dilemma. But I don't know. I can't point in modern terms globally that any people have been able to make that profound cultural, shift outside a favorable political environment and outside having political power to facilitate those developments.
Like Cuba.
I agree that we have to start the education, and we have to start. We have been doing it since I was 16. Now I'm 72. So it's a process. But we have to, and we have one political power, 28 years of PNC, so we can't say we had political power. But despite political power, the ideological orientation of those who had the political power, did not allow them to develop the African community and develop an African community politics independent of the party. I will argue the biggest disservice the Burnham and the PNC have done to African people is to develop an exclusive kind of party politics that is more Eurocentric. It is outside our African historical character and worldview, and fail to encourage an African community politics that could defend the fundamental interests of the community and also give the party space to deal with the national challenges. If we have had an African community politics, which is effective, we would have been in a better situation today. And we would have done deal with the PPP and all the challenges that we had. But once we get locked exclusively into the party politics, that is where, we got great difficulties, because all the sins of the party fall upon the community. So I will argue that to address all of those things, we have to have an African community politics, which is rooted in African worldview, philosophy, and so forth. It is an open challenge to the historical Eurocentric education and conditioning that we had.
Eric and Vincent, Ogunseye has thrown out something here that we need a dual approach. The party approach that deals with the party story, and the party approach has limitations because party politics has its limitations. But we simultaneously have an African community approach, and that these two approaches should not be in conflict with each other. Is that something in the present circumstances that we can begin to explore? Eric Phillips and then Vincent Alexander.
Ogunseye is right in that we need both. we don't have a Pan-African worldview in Guyana, other than Pana. We're disconnected from the global African community, even in reparations. And if we had that global view, holistic view, then we could, as a community, develop the politics that is in our best interest, regardless of who is in power. Right now, if you're Black, you suffer in Guyana, whether you are PPP or PNC, because of the view of the winner-take-all ethnic politics. And so you are locked into that architecture, and especially in a country of fear, where if you get political, your wife may lose the job, your son may lose the job, you're not going to be political. But if you had that other view that had been articulated and developed, then you could have balanced that. So I agree with him. We need a global Pan-African view that deals with issues affecting us, people of African descent globally. And if we had that view, we would look at Brazil as a market, because there are 120 million Black people there. We don't even think of that as a market. We think of the Caribbean. Africa has a huge market for us to trade, right? So we need to develop that global economic, political, philosophical view. And it's not a racist view. It's just pro you. That doesn't mean you're anti anybody.
Vincent, you're the PNC man here. You're the Burner man. Actor man. I mean, not actor, Ecpnm man. So you wear all these hats. Ogunseye's proposal, and I say use the word proposal for want of a better term, but is proposal that we need a dual approach that are not necessarily in conflict with one another. Where do you stand on that?
I think we have two options. One option is what has been proposed by Tacuma, and I think Eric has supported it. And that is, in a sense, you have to have nationally the kind of environment that facilitates civil society being included in the process of decision making, and that in that civil society, the interests of the people of African descent can be specifically expressed. So that yes, African civil society separate apart from the political party, if developed, could be an important aspect, because much of what happens is when you have the African group of people in any way associated with the party, it has two effects. On one hand, it kind of downplays the Afrocentric aspect of things. And on the other hand, it allows the opposing group to say that these people are not merely looking after African interests. They're seeking political power. Mm-hmm. So to have civil society, African civil society, that can then collectively confront the issues facing Africans, separate and apart from a political party, though the political party may share views and dispositions that are similar, is what may be one of our options.
Mm-hmm. Vincent, the
other option, in fact, would be to get a political system which recognizes the plurality of the society. Mm-hmm. And in recognizing the plurality of the society, has no problem with political party coming forward as an unequivocal representative of the people of any descent, African descent in this instance, not to the detriment of the national good. So that you don't have this situation where once you talk African, you're said to be a racist and against another group. I think that's the other option.
Vincent, is that really an option? Both options, I will never forget what I saw on TV and Facebook during the last elections, how Africans were viewed. So that's an irreconcilable situation in Guyana until the political system changes.
Yeah, yeah. I want to raise 2 points here. One is that the Ogunseye model that is proposed here, um, for that model to bring dividends to us, it has to avoid the conflict between political party and quote unquote community / civil society. Part of the problem with the early years is that once ASCREA and the PNC were singing from the same hymn book, all was well. And I, in part of my interviews with Guyana over time, he said that in 1964, he was approached by Africans who wanted ASCREA to contest the 64 election. He went to Burnham, he said, and reported to Burnham what was being proposed. And Burnham said he doesn't think it's a good idea. It will split Africans. And Guyana said that's all he wanted to hear. He was not going to go down in history as splitting African people. And so therefore, ASCREA and the PNC had a relationship between 64 and 71. But once in 71, ASCREA challenged the government on corruption. That was the end of that relationship. And the model disintegrated, if you will. So I think if we are going to revisit that model, we have to be very careful that it avoid the pitfall of the break on relationship between the party and the civil society / community group, that the party doesn't see the actions of the civil society group, even when it may disagree with the party, does not see it as anti-party for it to work. The second thing I want to say is that if you're looking for a model, just look at the Indian community. Since 2020, Indian civil society / community organizations have closed ranks around the Indian political party. It's the Indian private sector organizations have closed ranks around the Indian political party. Now, they are critical sometimes. You take, for example, my friend Christopher Ram, for example, has been quite vocal in his criticism in recent times of aspects of the PPP approach. The PPP lashes out back at him. They lash out at GHK Lal, etc., etc. So there are some exceptions, but by and large, the Indian cultural organizations and economic / business organizations have found common ground with the Indian political party. And I think that model, in a sense, works well for Indian solidarity. One may argue whether it brings dividends to Indian working class, but the fact of the matter is that they have a model that is working. So I just want to throw those two things out.
David, as long as you have a winner-take-all, you will see that model working. Once you have winner-take-all. If the system changes, then civil society would have a different approach, a different architecture, because it's about power. It's about the wealth. And regardless of what you may say, you look at that budget and you look at where it's being spent, the places where money is being spent is in Indian communities, in Amerindian communities. So there's a reward system. A winner-take-all system nurtures, promotes, and rewards racism and ethnic voting.
Yes. And if you look at the Indian civil society organizations, they're all coalesced around the party that the party won the 2020 election, the disputed election. They all coalesce around regime change, and they make sure the political power is in the hands of the political party. And then they now are critical of the party's attitude to Exxon. They're critical of the party's attitude to this, but they ensured in 2020 that the regime change led to the Indian party in power. I'm saying that to reinforce what all three of you said, and that is that Black people need political power to begin.
David, we're ignoring a little bit the global geopolitical environment where we have a clash of civilization. You're seeing it in Gaza. You're seeing it in Modi's India. You see it in Donald Trump's Make America Great
Again. Yes.
We have to understand those dynamics, that regardless of how bad a party may behave, if they're my party, I'm going to want them in power.
Yeah.
And we need to understand that too.
Yeah. Vincent?
Well, on one hand, we have to deal with reality. The African community is not, cannot be juxtaposed in terms of behavior to the Indian community or any other community. The very history of enslavement and which includes mental enslavement has brought us to a different point to the people of Indian descent. The people of Indian descent are still largely monolithic from the standpoint of the whatever religious and world outlook guides them. And if one looks at the history of this country, one would see that the Indian middle class distanced itself from the PPP when they had an ideological problem. But once that ideological problem had been overcome, the Indian Hoytists all returned to the PPP because at the end of the day, they have a religion, which is a world outlook. And I don't care how much Ali says he's a Muslim, Guyana properly defined the Hinduization of all Indians in Guyana, irrespective of which religious sect they belong to. So even if they're Christian and they're Muslim, essentially they're culturally Hindus. We do not have that same configuration of the African Guyanese community. Our challenge is greater because we are not hegemonic as such. We are highly heterogeneous and to a large extent ended up being individuals trying to eke out their own survival. And therefore, our challenge is, I agree with Eric in this regard, leadership. Leadership that can guide us into a direction of understanding the importance of our commonalities, working together in the context of the environment in which we exist, if we are to overcome even our individual problems.
Ogunseye, you come from a political party that's starting off with ethnic constituencies, a la Askria, IPRA, of course there was Ratoon, but the real mass base of the party really came from Askria and to some extent IPRA. You went into the phase of multiracialism and you are now in 2024. How do you reconcile your party's multiracialism with the proposal that you have thrown out here today for a politicization of African consciousness in Guyana?
I don't see no contradiction. When WPA was formed, we formed as a result of an African organization, ASCRIA, an Indian organization, IPRA, to be the two main mass thing, and we and the other groups with a conscious decision that race is important and find a resolution to the racial problem is important. So the WPA history on the question of race and trying to find a solution never really affected our politics. We never tell Guyanese that they mustn't be Africans and they mustn't be Indians. In fact, we promote that. We were asked for more Africanism, more Indianism, more Amerindianism. But to understand that at the end of the day, we have to find a solution, to make a cohesive country that allow us to take the advantage of our national resources and so. So I don't think that the WPA at that time and the WPA at present fundamentally have problems on those issues. Our condition in terms of how the party developed and how the resurgence of political polarization or racial politics, after 92 elections, elections after elections have destroyed a multiracial constituency. So there's no active multiracial constituency, and the WPA pay a price to that. And there's very little we could do about that until, but we maintain, and when we were WPA, we argue for power sharing. We never see the WPA as being the salvation to the problem. Okay, we saw the salvation of the problem rooted in a renovation of the governance system. But we felt that the WPA, if it could keep the African Indians and Americans united, will quickly facilitate the necessary government transition that you need. So I will say that the WPA today, in terms of its thinking, is not in a crisis on those matters. We're in a crisis in terms of our ability to affect change. In the 70s and the 80s, and so I would say we had more ability to affect change.
And you're talking at the mass level.
At the mass level.
Yeah.
Because, the challenges that faced the country, and I think that the party politics had reached, a deadlock, that it wasn't resolving problems, and Indian community, that felt excluded by the PNC's long domination in power, open to collaboration with African, and non-Indian groups and so forth. At present, the situation, in a sense, is the same in the sense that the party politics have driven us, at a point of serious crisis. I say more profound crisis than in the 70s and the 80s. But at the same time, with oil money, and the present PPP leadership and their behavior has made it tremendously difficult for the races to come together, outside the historical racial parties, to implement a quick change. I feel that the dialectics of the engagement have strengthened each ethnic party. The present PPP behavior strengthened the PPP and strengthened the PNC. The problem with the PNC is it didn't call in the right actions. If they call African people to battle and take the right thing, they will see how they will get more returns. But in objective political terms, the PPP behavior strengthens the PPP. It drives the African community closer to dependency of the PNC. But the PNC, in its present way it's being constituted and the way its worldview of its city situation, it is not using effectively the critical assets that it has as an African party in the African community, where we have strategic assets that could transform this thing in a matter of days.
Eric Phillips, Vincent Alexander, your closing thoughts. I think we've made some progress here in terms of a starting point, in that we're talking here about two things: about the politicization of our community instincts, our community initiatives, and secondly, to be very clear that the present electoral system of winner take all is not in the short term, medium term, or the long term beneficial to African progress in Guyana. I think we are agreed on those two things. Eric and then Vincent.
Yes, David. Any leader in Guyana, much less an African leader, that thinks winner take all politics is inclusive politics, does not understand our history or is not bright enough to lead African people. Because it's there. And with oil revenues, it's going to become worse. I think what we need to do is to understand our plight We need to develop our own national development strategy within the context of this economy. We need to focus on the key priorities to create a Black middle class, a Black private sector. We need to also realize that that sector is dependent on the masses of African Guyanese. So we have to re-educate, we have to retrain, because the system will not do it and the political parties will not do it. I doubt any of the existing political parties will come out and say that it's in the national interest for African Guyanese to be affirmed because everybody else has been affirmed. They will not say that. But yet, if they are indeed to change the constitution, they have to come to that understanding. I had this discussion with Kemraz a long time ago, where he says it's not the system, it's people.
Yeah.
And I said to him that the system creates bad people, winner take all. It's nature. So I think we've discussed a lot of important points, and we're common ground in most of this. We just need to figure out how we get this understood, because that's the first thing. Our community is so desperate in many ways that they're just focusing on survival and not on what's in the best interest of themselves collectively. And at the same time, those who are in power really have an indifference to African Guyanese because they don't need us.
They don't need us. Vincent, there was a time in the 1990s, at the turn of the 2000s, when there was a critical mass of leaders in the PNC that embrace power sharing and a movement away from winner take all. The same occurred in the WPA, the same occurred in ACDA. You yourself, Vincent, Ogunseye, Eric Phillips, myself, in fact, Eric wrote the foreword to my first book that addressed that issue. And we all were at one, and we went into constitutional reform. And you, Vincent, were part of the constitutional reform process. But we did not get out of that constitutional reform the desired constitutional change to effect what we all were thinking. ACDA, WPA, PNC. In fact, Hoyt, the quintessential Westminster, came out and said, power sharing is an idea whose time has come. He died 3 months later, and so on. Are we, and you know the PNC better than all the rest of us here, are we close to that point in opposition, in the opposition ranks? Are we close to that point again as we go into another round of constitutional reform? Is there a resolve, as it was back in 20 years ago, to address this question of power sharing and shared governance, which was a term that came into effect by your party, the PNC, at the time? Vincent.
Let me start off by saying that Hoyt came around to the idea that it was a time for power sharing when the moment that could have best been used to forge power sharing had gone.
Yes.
He was slow out of the block.
You're talking about the 1997, the post-1997 election crisis.
Yes, he was slow and late out of the block.
Yes.
The second point I want to make is Guyana is, let's say Guyana is a boat. It's a boat, and we're all in that boat. I think that what is essential is the carrot and stick approach. On one hand, action has got to be taken to push us in the direction of shared governance. And intellectually, we've got to kind of present that as the carrot. reasoning why. But it has to be accompanied by the stick approach, which demonstrates that if the carrot isn't accepted, then the boat will not go anywhere. In fact, it's likely to jump. There is that need for the carrot and stick approach. In relation to the People's National Congress, I cannot say that they are in the best position at this time in terms of those ideas. I think that there's lots of work to be done, even in that party, from an ideational perspective. I think in some regards, the Hoyt era and the de-escalation of ideology has affected the party, and therefore they aren't sufficiently congregated around ideas. They may be congregated around material achievements and things like that, but a party has got to be guided by ideas. I don't think they're sufficiently congregated around ideas, and therefore there's work to be done there as well, if they're to play an integral part or a meaningful part in taking us forward in a boat that's sinking, where there's a need for the carrot, a carrot to benefit everyone, and the stick, which will benefit no one.
Vincent, David, can I ask a question? Because we have to have the right assumption set. Do you think the PPP think the boat is sinking? Which is your assumption? I would say no.
I'm not hearing Eric.
No, the assumption that the boat is sinking. I don't think that's a fair assumption. If I have control of everything, the boat is great. So I think as we look at the carrot and stick approach, we have to understand the true dynamics, because we now got 100,000 Venezuelans. We now have all sorts of other buffers in the community. We have total control of all the assets and contracts. So we have to also re-examine those assumptions when we decide what to do. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah.
I would respond to that by saying this. In a country where corruption is rampant, in a country where crime is rampant, in a country where people might not be openly anti-status quo, but are individually anti-status quo in the things they do and the things they don't do, then the boat is not stable. For me, the boat is sinking.
It may not be our boat. It may be somebody else's boat.
It's one boat. We don't have a choice.
Yeah.
It's one boat.
Yeah. Ogunseye, I think we got a frank response there from Vincent in relation to the PNC's condition as it relates to power sharing and the doing away with the winner-take-all system. It's only fair that I ask you the same question of where the WPA stands. Are you the same position as you were 20 years ago going into the constitutional reform? Your co-lead at that time, Rupert Rupnarayan, was equally involved in the process as Vincent was. And your party, along with the PNC and with ACDA, led by Eric and others, were in the forefront of advocating for a change in the system. As we go into another round of constitutional reform, is your party still at the level of idea and practice wedded to that idea and that process?
Until the WPA formally says something different, I will have to say that we are still committed and wedded to that, because we are committed to the national solution. Of course, we haven't discussed our approach to the Constitutional Reform Commission. We still to discuss and work out a response. But
in the party, if I can say, it was put on the agenda.
Yeah, so we put it on the agenda, and we have to. We will soon be discussing it. But knowing the WPA, I don't think the WPA will shift away from that. I think the imperative that faces in us, now is even stronger and more urgent than in the 70s or the 80s. And I don't expect a different position. I think where WPA may have problems is to what extent the party may feel confident enough that in this situation where, let me say, the PNC is ambivalent or the PNC is not committed publicly to that, it may very well affect how the WPA feels it could use its energies, to prosecute the case, not promote. Promote is the easiest thing. We could talk and write and argue, but you got to prosecute the case, the carrot and the stick, the use Vincent method, because you have to back this up. We deal with the PPP with African resistance. You see, where I differ with the opposition, and probably, generally, and I differ with a lot of the African political thinkers, is that we understand our challenges, we understand what's facing us, but I don't think we share the same level of urgency, and we believe that we have time. And when I listen to our arguments, both internally and externally, what's happening around us, the longer we wait to bring this thing to a halt, okay, we will less be able to do it with time, because all the negatives will be concentrated on, and become strong around us. And I think that we have just a small window where a lot of the things that we point haven't fully matured to imprison us into the logic that we seems to be going. And we have to use that window. I am convinced if the African community and the African political leadership had turned the local government elections into an African uprising and a national uprising, the teachers want to be out striking today. And the PNC will get all the things that they said the fight they wanted for, they will get it, because there can be no change in them local government entity when the country is in political crisis. So, and I'm making this point to say, if people has to understand, if you say you got a historical moment, if you say that time is not on your side, if you say you, for the time being, you got some strategic assets which will change over time. If you don't, if the assets that we got, I don't want to mention in details, it won't remain so all the time. Time is not on your side. You have to use those assets now.
Time is not on your side. Eric Phillips is still wedded to the getting rid of the winner-take-all system, and to engage this new constitutional reform process.
Categorically, yes. As I said, it's egregious. It is a racist system. It's done for homogeneous white societies. And it's the solution if we're going to live in here peacefully. I want to add one thing, though, because there are other dynamics, and Tacuma is taking us down there in terms of time. What is the role of the international community in this? What do they want in Guyana? I think that's a critical question, because they could change things overnight too. And the question we have to ask is, what do they want? What's in their best interest? Do we understand that? Because they have the ability to do a lot of things. And my final thought is that you cannot change the politics of Guyana just internally. You have to have external allies.
And that's where we will pick it up at our next program. Hopefully next week we come back. We will pick it up there, the international dimension, because the black struggle in the African diaspora has been advanced not only by the internal politics, but the Pan-African instinct, the Pan-African movement, the Pan-African idea played an important role. We go back to the first conference in 1900, organized by Sylvester Williams, and how that was able to chart the process later on Du Bois's conference. And we come to the 1944 conference, and the role that that conference, led by George Patmore, played in the independence movement in Africa, because it was at that meeting, that Pan-African meeting, that the independence movement that brought Nkrumah and Jomo Kenyatta and others to power really came out of that 1994 conference. And to some extent, the Caribbean independence movement. The League of Colored People at that time in the 1930s, our own John Carter was the secretary of the International League of Colored People. He came home and formed an organization at home. But the point I'm making is that the international, the global aspect of the Black struggle is as important to our movement forward as our internal struggle. And given where Guyana is at the moment, given the oil reserves that we have, given the neighborhood that we belong to, we cannot escape the global engagement. There is the global engagement at the level of the superpowers, but as Eric been saying here, there's a global engagement at the level of Black people. Black people in Africa, African states, 120 million Black people just next door to us in Brazil, another almost 30 million Black people in the United States of America. We have in our own
Colombia has 7 million.
We have Haiti. We have the global aspect of the Black struggle is as important, and that's where we're going to be when we come back next week. Eric, Vincent, Tacuma, thank you all so much for coming through tonight, and see you all next week. Tomorrow is our anniversary, Republic anniversary, insofar as you guys celebrate a happy Mashramani, happy Republic, and then we're back to the grind after a day out in the sun. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for staying with us in this extended program tonight of African economic empowerment, economic justice for Africans. This is a conversation that has to continue. But I think tonight we hit on something that could give us a start as we proceed with this conversation. And that is the politicization of our cultural instincts. The politicization of our cultural instincts. That is not just song and dance. You see that little girl singing a political song? You see how quick they close it down? They're sending that message to our little children. You can sing and dance and wind up. But when you come in to sing about conscious thing, they're going to cut it out. The ball is in our court. The ball is in our court, and we've got to engage it. Thank you all again so much. See you all tomorrow night. Yes, tomorrow night we are going to be on. After the mashing and all of that, we still have work to do. See you all tomorrow night.